How much do you really know about modern engine oil, its in-service life, filtration, and bottom line, I guess, the impact of all of this on your car's longevity? I thought I knew a fair bit by now, but then I went out and stress tested that by meeting up with Valvoline and Ryco across a couple of deep technical background briefings on modern engine oil and filtration. And you know what? It turns out I had unwittingly become something of a dinosaur. Go figure. And perhaps you have too. So let us both enjoy the remainder of 2025 somewhat better lubricated. Here is the full technical deep dive into the most vital fluid in your car, and also the easiest one to get wrong in the DIY space. I'd like to thank Auto One for setting up these briefings. I learnt a lot, I have to say. Auto One is your one-stop shop for oils and filtration for punters like us, and also for the trade. So if you're confronted by this minefield of choices, like 400 different flavours, and only one of them is right, darken their door. You'll get expert advice over the counter at Auto One for free. Auto One also wants to give you 25% off selected filters when you spend more than $100 on oils. I'll put full details and a link in the description. Just to start at the very beginning, every time they rip a barrel of crude oil out of the ground, which would be 159 litres or 42 gallons in America, and jam it into a refinery, it turns, somewhat miraculously, into roughly 135 litres of liquid fuels, like petrol, diesel, jet fuel, kero. There's also 5 to 10 litres of so-called heavy fuel oil for big ships and heavy industry, and maybe 10 litres of propane, which for oil is just like the bubbles in beer. A bunch of other stuff falls out in small quantities too. Asphalt, waxes, chemical feedstocks for plastics, fertilisers, big pharma, and solvents in there as well. Crude oil is properly miraculous stuff, which of course is why, quote unquote, just stopping it would mean going back to living in the 12th century. And I think it's fair to say that most of us really don't want to do that. You also get 1 to 2 litres of lubricating oil per barrel, which is kind of what we're talking about today. A tiny fraction of about 1% of the total. Ballpark. So many things in our world need lubricating too. Lubricating oil is therefore something of a precious commodity. Something we typically take completely for granted, I'd suggest. Think of it like this, okay? Steel melts at about 1400 degrees C, but the petrol in your engine burns at between 2000 and 2500 degrees C, briefly. During the power stroke, the bore fills with radiating plasma hotter than the melting point of the material containing it. 50 times a second if you're driving around at 6,000 RPM. Like, mind blown, okay? That bore is only lubricated by a thin, like really thin film of oil, which has just been flambéed at a couple of thousand degrees C. And when the piston rockets back up that bore, that post-flambe oil film is all that stops the rings from rubbing on the bore. And all kinds of, subsequent dogs and cats living together, nightmare, hellscape, metallurgical scenarios that go along with doing that. And this isn't even extreme operation. This is just what oil does every day. Just another day getting roasted over and over. And speaking of assaults, crank and rod bearings routinely impose on oil films hydrodynamic pressure up to 10,000 psi or so, which is a lazy 70 megapascals. Rings on the pre-scorched cylinder walls, 2,000 psi there. But it's actually cam followers that take the cake on this, up to 200,000 psi in, admittedly, very small contact patches. To say that oil does a huge job is just this epic understatement, especially as it needs to withstand all of that for 15,000 kilometres or a year, whichever comes first typically, while it's increasingly getting contaminated with combustion byproducts and expected to hold all of that contamination in suspension, i.e. without forming sludge, and still do its primary job of preventing metal-on-metal contact using a film that's only a few microns thick. Degree of difficulty, 13,000 out of a possible 10. Plus, it's got to stop rust and not turn into foam in the Category 6 million cyclone that's going on inside every crankcase. So, I'd argue that oil is pretty easy stuff to take for granted when you can just buy it in a plastic jug and tip it into your car on a lazy Saturday arvo in the driveway at home without needing a degree in petrochemical engineering. At this point, I think we might bust just a few DIY oil change myths, starting with full synthetic. Full synthetic oil actually starts in the ground as crude oil. It takes at least 5 steps to turn that into mineral oil at the refinery, plus another 2 chemical processing steps to get to full synthetic. So-called full synthetic oil is actually a base mineral stock with a Jedi-level chemically engineered additive package on top as a kind of cocktail. And it's that additive package which gives the oil the Goldilocks characteristics to do its job inside your specific engine to meet the car manufacturer's increasingly demanding and at times unreasonable OEM specifications. That additive package gives the oil its longevity. It stops it breaking down during these extended service intervals that we demand today because nobody wants to go back to changing their oil every 3 months, right? It prevents the parts inside the car from oxidizing. It stops them from touching each other. It keeps the contaminants in suspension so they get to the filter. We'll get to the filter in just a bit, incidentally. And it also prevents foaming. In addition to all of that, it supports the operation of things like diesel particle filters and wet timing belts, depending on the requirements of your specific engine. You need the right low ash formulation to protect the particle filter, and it's also awfully nice if the oil doesn't start to dissolve the timing belt kind of thing. That's never good when that happens. And that means that not all, for example, 5W30 or whatever grade oils are equivalent. You need the right additive pack for your specific engine. Getting this right has never been more critical. In fact, getting the right oil, I would argue, is the hardest and most critical part of the whole oil change at home scenario. What this means is that all of the alphanumeric encoding after the basic viscosity grade specification really matters. All of it has to match your specific engine's needs. Just to paint a picture of the underlying complexity here, okay? With diesels, there's a C classification system for compatible oils. It's also called an ACEA grade. This is for a thing called SAPS, S-A-P-S. It's a very acronym-dense area. SAPS is sulfated ash, phosphorus, and sulfur. Now, I will not judge you if you start bleeding from the ears at this point. I'm just trying to lay out the complexity. The ratings are C1 through C5, okay? And your engine will specify one of those C ratings if needed. C1 is very low SAPs, okay? C2, 4 and 5 are just low SAPs. C3 is mid-level SAPs. None of this is intuitive superficially, but it's super important to get this right because, for example, if you use C1 or C2 in an engine that demands C3 or C4, you might not get the wear protection you need. If you use C3 or C4 in an engine designed for C1, it could clog your DPF, which is also a several $1,000 problem over time, right? Nobody wants this. So measure twice and cut once, dude. On the thorny issue of specific oil brands now, I think this is a bit like tyres and so many other things. You are flat out insane, in my view, if you use some oil brand that you've never heard of because it's cheap. But the trusted brands, the Valvolines, Penrites, Newlons and Castrols, for example, it's pretty hard to go wrong with them. They've got established reputations, which they protect by protecting your engine as well as it can be protected. And let's not forget, they're in a race with each other. And it's pretty much a dead heat, I'd suggest. To get the right oil, you need to know exactly what model, variant and year your car is. And you need the granular detail of the car, right down to the engine specification. It needs to be lined up with the granular detail of the oil that you buy for it. Do not get this wrong. I know the major oil brands all have online oil selectors, and you can, of course, get expert help selecting the right oil over the counter at Auto One. This is one of the things that Auto One does really well, and it's why I'm working with them on this. Whatever you do, however, do not stand in front of some giant wall of oils on retail display and select one just on the basis of, I think this 5W30 looks kind of okay. That could end quite badly over time. And sure, modern synthetic oil is expensive, I'll give you that, but it does last 4 times longer than oil from 30 years ago, broadly, and it protects your engine a hell of a lot better, so you have to factor all of that in. I'd argue it's actually still pretty good value in the context of automotive insurance. So let's say you're at home and you drain the oil and it comes out really filthy, okay? That might concern you, but in fact, this is unequivocally a good thing. And this was one of those light bulb moments for me, right? That obvious contamination in the oil is coming out of your engine at the point that you are changing it, and it's coming out because the oil is doing its job, holding it there in suspension. It's not sludge lining the inside of your sump. It's out of the engine and on its way to the waste oil recycler council type depot, right? On this, please don't be an environmental vandal and just chuck it in the bin. There's a place for waste oil and the bin is not that. One of my own urban myths that got busted in this background briefing package was dumping the oil while the engine was warm. I always thought that was a great idea, but I was told unequivocally by technical experts that this no longer matters. I was just being kind of a dinosaur, and also a dinosaur. You try reading for this long, dude. The additive pack keeps those contaminants in suspension irrespective of temperature. So if you want to change the oil without warming the car up, just have at it, dude. That's perfectly okay in 2025. Now, also on the dinosaur front, I was also told that as far as oil performance is actually concerned, short urban trips versus longer highway runs is really not the issue that it used to be. Oil performance is unlikely to be compromised by the short trip running that many urbanised Australians routinely do. Go figure. And that's got to be a good thing, right? It never hurts your car to go for a run on the highway, but it's not as critical for your oil as it used to be. Here's 2 pointers that are almost certain to spark up some entertaining debate down the pub, perhaps this Friday night. If you're a DIYer and you think it's a grand idea to change your oil spec, as far as the car industry, your car maker is concerned, all bets are off and you are absolutely on your own. Now, if there's a good reason to change the spec because you've modified the car or whatever, then okay, but deviating from the manufacturer's spec is a real minefield. If you're doing this in an informed way, perhaps you will derive some benefit. But I just wouldn't be changing the oil spec or the grade on the basis of some, beard stroker on Facebook having a thought bubble and deciding that he knew better than Toyota in respect of the best oil for your Hilux. Obviously, if your engine blows up and you've got the wrong oil in it, do not be breath holding on the issue of getting some warranty type support from the car maker. It's just not going to happen. Secondly, if you buy a project car, like an old Land Cruiser or Patrol, to turn into the pimp's Cadillacs of 4x4s that you've always dreamed of owning, or perhaps some, aging Forester XT to slam and otherwise turn into a weapon that just flies under the radar kind of thing, it might be a really bad idea to flush the engine off the bat. And hear me out on this before you get into the comments, okay? The idea of flushing, of course, is to break up the sludge and get rid of it, which sounds perfectly fine, like good idea. Just tip a bottle of sump flushing laxative in and let it do its voodoo, and then you poop out years of accumulated sludge. Who doesn't want that? Sounds pretty good to me. Like, what could possibly go wrong? Well, you might poop out only some of the sludge, and you might loosen up some other sludge to the point where after the change it breaks free, and that's over, coming days or weeks, and then it floats around and blocks the oil galleries, etc., and possibly seizes up your engine and causes all kinds of mechanical mayhem. I'm told that a better strategy for these vehicles of, unknown service provenance that one buys, for project cars typically, is simply to change the oil and the filter twice as often as recommended and let the oil's additive package and the filter do their jobs by gently and kind of incrementally going to work on any built-up sludge rather than just impose this shock treatment of maximum poop in one hit with a flush. That's a matter for your weighty consideration, I'd suggest. And one final thing for the keen DIYer. If you know how to change engine oil, generally you know, because, Grandpappy taught you way back in the day in the barn, whatever. Great. Practical skills, always worthwhile. But they might not translate to the 2020s, okay? It might not be enough, in other words, to circumvent disaster on some reasonably modern car, because specific vehicles can ambush you, like they can properly ambush you. For example, the 5-cylinder 3.2 litre previous generation Ford Ranger have a self-priming oil pump. And that sounds like a good idea, doesn't it? But if you drain the oil in that vehicle and then you knock off and have lunch, or the phone rings and it's your massage therapist and you can't not take that call while it drains away, that seems like a good thing. Get it properly drained out down there. The oil pump is going to lose its prime. Then you refill the car after your vital call and you start the engine. The pump's not going to reprime. The engine will thus be operating without oil pressure for as long as it takes to compose an indignant letter to its barrister and then hand you some, $20,000 repair bill. And this is, of course, a poor return on any DIY investment and all the good intentions in the world in the driveway, right? With the previous Ranger, there's a dry sump time limit. Do not exceed that sump draining time, okay? More broadly, there are doubtless other traps and ambushes out there laid by other vehicles. It depends on the specific vehicle, so the onus is on you to know exactly how to change the oil in your specific car, the better to avert potential own goals of exactly this nature. In researching this story, I also got in touch with Ryco's technical team for the deep background briefing on filters. Ryco obviously is the Coca-Cola of filtration here in Australia, and the first of two real light bulb moments arising from that conference call was how ridiculously stupid it is to compromise on filters, considering A, the job that they do, B, the consequences of a cheap trash one letting you down in the worst way, and C, given that some of the best filters you can buy with synthetic media are only about $30 retail. A good quality filter that meets or exceeds OEM specifications is going to be around $20. And to me, that means filters are just ridiculously good value for money. A poor quality filter isn't therefore going to save you all that much outright cash, but if something goes wrong, it could cost you a bomb, dude. If your engine's lubrication system is a game of soccer, the filter is the goalie. The oil's function is to hold the contaminants and combustion byproducts in suspension, but the filter's job is to catch those and take them out of play as they attempt to flow on through and do their evil work down there. Incidentally, 80% of the life limitation on engines is down to wear. So filtration is there to stop abrasive particles from circulating and grinding away endlessly, slashing the life of your engine. And on this, the first line of defence is undoubtedly your air filter. There's a hell of a lot of silicon dioxide and related abrasive chemical compounds in dust. So never cheap out on air filters either. Australia is probably the number one OECD country for uniquely damaging dust. Oi, oi, oi. Obviously, the technical challenge with oil filters is that the smaller the filtration screen, like the finer the screen, the greater the potential limitation on flow, right? So this means the actual technology in the filter media is up there, given that this is such a delicate balancing act, especially with filters designed to perform better than OEM spec. And this was light bulb number 2, okay? Car makers design engines for particular service lives. And this is not to criticise them. They need a target. The engine needs to last for, X life, and then they can design and validate all of the associated engine subsystems to deliver that design life, including the filters. I had previously thought of OEM spec filters as being the gold standard in filtration, but frankly, they're not. You can certainly filter the oil better than OEM spec, and all other things being equal, obviously, that's going to increase your engine's lifespan. And this is definitely something you should do, I would argue, if your current car is a keeper. OEMs typically look at filtering out particles down to about 40 microns. Now, if you're hazy on this, 100 microns is the width of human hair, so 40 microns is pretty fine. Just over 1/1000th of an inch in America. A top shelf filter might cut that in half, and the premium you pay for that is essentially for the nanotechnology in the filtration medium. Basically, what we're talking about here is removing a greater number of suspended abrasive contaminants across a broader range of sizes, better than OEM performance, in other words. The upshot of this is never run a cheap oil filter with good oil. And if you're trying to save a few bucks on oil, you should always back that up with a high quality filter, because high quality filters are just so affordable. Now, as for doing the job itself, there are a few classic ways to screw this up in the driveway at home, and it's so entertaining for all of your mates. First, and most obviously, always change the filter if you're changing the oil. Never cheap out here by leaving an old filter in place with new oil. Keep saying to yourself, good filters are affordable. Now, secondly, if your car uses a cartridge type filter, you got to make sure that the core of that filter goes back in when you reassemble the whole package. If you haven't done this before, you might make this classic mistake. Not doing this is an excellent way to ensure zero filtration. And people have actually lunched their engines by failing to observe this rather obvious stipulation. You always have to put the right bits back, which, now that I think about it, is pretty good general DIY advice right there. And you heard it here first, dude. Always use the right filter tool as well. Okay? Doesn't have to be Snap-on in the DIY universe. You don't have to spend the big bucks. Most quality budget tools fit most filters, bottom line. But just measure twice and cut once on all of this, and maybe even buy the tool when you buy the filter. There's another one just there. Uncle Darth is holding the smaller one, you might note. Just buy the tool when you buy the filter, okay? Make sure they're compatible. It's not that hard. And even then, remember to practice cursing, which is a real art form, because filters can be notoriously hard to access in the engine bay, even with the right tools. Some cars are just abominations like this. On reassembly, okay, make sure you lubricate the neoprene gasket ring thingo on the filter with just a few drops of engine oil. Get a good smear around that with your finger before cursing, okay? This makes sure that the ring is going to mate smoothly with the mounting face when you tighten the lot up. And speaking of tightening it all up, when you're handling oil, I would always wear nitrile gloves whenever you do anything with oil. Nobody really knows what's in the additive package, and there's always a chance that at least some of that is potentially bad for you, and a barrier like a cheap set of gloves really can't hurt. Always use the filter wrench for reassembly too, because a normal human is not strong enough to achieve adequate torque doing it by hand. And the risk here is pretty clear. If the filter is insufficiently tight, oil can escape under pressure past the gasket, and you really don't want that. Conventional wisdom is to tighten by hand to the point where the gasket engages with the mating surface on the car, and then use the tool to go another 3/4 of a turn in total. And if there's any ambiguity here, the tightening instructions are actually written on the side of the filter. And I know that reading the instructions is a revolutionary, confronting concept for many DIYers, but of course that doesn't stop it from being an excellent idea. Remember, you're not doing it up just to keep it physically in place, right? You're doing it up so that the seal remains intact at 400 or 500 kPa, which is typically the pressure limiting bypass valve activation pressure. Quality filters are also typically designed for a minimum burst pressure of 2000 kPa. And I know you might be hazy on kPa. 100 kPa is roughly 1 atmosphere, okay? The air you're breathing now is about 100 kPa. So tyres are typically about 200 kPa, ballpark, maybe a bit more, but that's where we are. So 2 atmospheres of gauge pressure in a tyre above the air you're breathing now, which makes it 3 atmospheres absolute, okay? Oil bypass valves are 4 or 5 atmospheres, therefore the burst pressure is about 20 atmospheres. Compressed air in the compressor in your workshop, probably about 10 atmospheres in the tank, and a propane cylinder for the barbecue outside, probably also about 10 atmospheres. Obviously, this is another risk with low quality filters, right? Because if they burst, the oil is going to depart under pressure, the sump's going to empty, the bearings are going to run dry, the engine's going to destroy itself, and then, of course, the red warning light will activate on the dash. Real win for false economy there, I'd suggest. Thank you very much for sticking with me to this point. I know this video has been something of an endurance event. I hope the video's been worthwhile for you. I hope it helps, DIY dude, perhaps out there slogging away in the driveway this weekend, doing the Lord's work with a wrench. Once again, thanks very much to Auto One, to Valvoline and to Ryco for the expert advice and also the support that made this report possible. Remember the 25% off selected filters deal when you spend $100 on oil at Auto One. Full details in the description. And if you're unsure about any of this stuff, just ask over the counter at any Auto One store. This is what they do for the trade as well as DIYers like us. They are totally match fit on oils and filtration, so just ask away. And let me know in the comments, did you learn anything here today? Did you learn, like me for example, that you'd become something of a dinosaur with a brain just jam-packed with outdated notions on this important topic? How confronting. Tell me what you got out of the video today, dude, in the comments. And thank you once again so much for watching.